Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the X's and Dogs podcast. So, I couldn't think of what we were going to talk about in today's show. Of course, I'm kidding. This is my first time talking to you all since the Cleveland Browns have hired Todd Monken to be their next head coach. And I want to start the show today off by saying this. I've been very busy with work. I wanted to get an episode, a reaction podcast out to you guys quicker. But in the same breath, I think it's actually been pretty beneficial for me to wait until this moment to provide my reaction for you guys. What I mean by that is at the time, and if you follow me on social media, you follow me on X. If you don't, you should go follow me, X's and Dogs, on Twitter. I was very open about my disapproval of the hire that the Browns made in bringing in Todd Monken. And I did this pretty much immediately after the news broke. Ultimately, I think over the past 36 hours or so since the news broke on social media and we heard all the reports and etc., I think I've had a lot of time to reflect, come to a better level-headed conclusion regarding Todd Monken here in Cleveland. And I want to say this. I want to take responsibility. I want to take ownership in the fact that I think head coaching searches result in rather silly, like camp-based opinions where you're either in one camp or the other for candidates that we don't even know if they're going to have any success at the NFL level. None of the candidates that the Browns were interviewing with, talking to, had experience winning in the NFL. Jim Schwartz had experience in the NFL. He was not successful in Detroit, even though he had Matt Stafford and the best wide receiver of all time. Like, we had no proof that any of these guys, and no reason to believe really that we could be confident in any of these candidates winning a lot of games for the Cleveland Browns. Even with that, we all were very hard set on certain candidates, and I'm lumping myself in there. If you follow the show, I've been a Nathan Scheelhaase guy since the coaching search started over 3 weeks ago. I wanted the Browns to bring in a young offensive mind. But over the past, like I said, 36 hours, I've had time to reflect on the hire and come to the realization that it simply makes a lot of sense for the Browns. But there's another side to it that I do want to talk about, and that's kind of going to be the main idea of this podcast. I think two things can be true with the Todd Monken hire. One, it can make a lot of sense from a football standpoint for the Cleveland Browns. And two, it can still cause a lot of concern and raise a lot of questions for what's going on behind the scenes and how decisions are being made in Berea. So let's start with the football side of things. If you would have asked me at the moment Kevin Stefanski was fired, what are some of the things that you're looking for in the next candidate? I would have said a guy who holds people accountable, because I thought the team was rather undisciplined and lacked true leadership, because they're not getting it from the players on the team, so you need it from the coaches in that case. Would have said somebody to raise the floor of the offense, provide a base level of success offensively, because this team has no floor. The floor is as low as you can possibly go, and was that way with Kevin Stefanski, and I think that's a huge part of the reason why Kevin was let go here in Cleveland. So I would have asked for both of those things, and I would have asked for a guy who has a resume that makes sense to be a head coach. What I mean by that is avoiding the Freddie Kitchens or the ridiculous interview, whoever the candidate would have been. I think like Phillip Rivers got interviewed this cycle. I just wanted the Browns to avoid making a mockery of themselves like that. So those are my three things that I was looking for in this coaching search. I wasn't really worried defensively. If we brought in a defensive mind who could hold the team accountable, I would have needed to see a plan on how they could get better offensively, but I wouldn't have wrote that candidate off. But I definitely preferred an offensive mind. And I know what you guys are thinking as I say those things. You're thinking I'm just saying it to represent what Todd Monken is in a candidate. But I combat you with, go watch my previous podcast. Go watch what I've talked about. Those are all things that I have addressed before I would have even considered there was a slight possibility of Todd Monken being the coach. And so over the last 36 hours, I've been able to think critically, take some time to relax, get my feet out of the camp of Nathan Scheelhaus or nothing, step back from the ledge, and it really became kind of evident to me as to why the Browns would come to the conclusion that Todd Monken might be a better option than a guy like Nathan Scheelhaus. So I want to start there. I think Todd Monken provides a few things for the Cleveland Browns, particularly offensively, of course. I think first and foremost, Todd Monken provides this team with a floor that they, like I said, have not had for a number of years. Everywhere Todd Monken has went, he has had success offensively. It's pretty much as simple as that. You take out the 1 year in Cleveland, which the offense it wasn't as good as it should have been, but it wasn't like horrible. I think that was the year we had 2 1,000-yard receivers. I mean, Nick Chubb played well. Like, there was production offensively. The team was just a mess all around. But, you take out that year. In Baltimore, Todd Monken led the 6th-ranked offense. This is yards per game. The 1st-ranked offense in yards per game. And then this past season, it was 16th. Obviously, we know that team dealt with a lot of injuries offensively. And then, to go along with that, while in Georgia, Monken obviously led a Stetson Bennett quarterbacked team to 2 national championships, which is just very impressive. I know that coaching staff is very good apart from him too, and it's a power program there. But he had that Georgia offense looking better than it ever has. So that's his resume over the past 5 years. Before that, obviously, he had the down year in Cleveland. And before that, he was leading a very productive offense in Tampa Bay with, Jameis Winston. We know Jameis has his turnover problems. It does not matter who the coach is. Like, Jameis Winston is going to throw turnovers, even if he has Sean McVay as his head coach. I think Sean McVay might be able to mitigate it a little bit, but he'll do it anyway. Like, that's just a player he is. But the offense was productive there as well. So, what my point in this is that we know that Monken's going to provide a floor. I think he will come in to this Cleveland Browns offense, and it's going to take work. Like, we're going to need to bring the pieces in free agency and the draft and trades. We're going to have to do that regardless of who the candidate was. But I think once we do that, Monken will have the ability to have this offense playing significantly better than it did last year. And I can confidently say that because everywhere he's went, he's been able to do that. Um, we can get into the specifics, and we'll do this later on and as we get into, further podcast talk, breaking down kind of the way Todd Monken goes about coaching offense. But, from a broad standpoint, he's matchup based. He recognizes weaknesses in particular defenses and goes about attacking those weaknesses in different ways. He's not very schematically dependent, meaning he's not going to pick one scheme. Like, he's not going to run the West Coast run game and do play action off of that every single week. That's just not the type of coach he is. The game plan shifts pretty heavily week to week. I think he is one of those offensive minds that has the ability to leverage the teams you're playing, leverage the things they do to your benefit. And those are the best offensive coaches in the league right now. I think that's what Kevin Stefanski lacked. That's the area he lacked in the most to me, watching the tape of all the games, watching too much tape of this goddamn team. It just stood out to me that, like, while there were opportunities missed by a number of offensive players over the past couple seasons, I just thought Kevin was not doing enough, was not being creative enough to put his offensive players in a place to succeed based on what he was either seeing or anticipating to see, and should have been anticipating to see from the opposing defense that he was playing. To me, the game plan against the Steelers looked really similar to the game plan against the Bengals. And it was kind of like that every single week. So I think that's going to be the difference with Todd Monken, and that's what I'm excited to see. I think if we can get ourselves a dynamic wide receiver with that first pick we have, and then build up the offensive line to the extent that we can, I'll be excited to see how Monken is able to utilize his best players on offense, because that's another huge thing with Monken. He wants to get the ball to his best players. Go look at any team that he was the offensive coordinator for. The best players on that offense are relied upon very much so. What's Zay Flowers in Baltimore? I was having a brain fart there. Couldn't think of the guy's name. Zay Flowers, Derrick Henry, Mark Andrews, before he kind of hit a cliff. I think just in his career, I think he's kind of, getting up there in age and whatnot. But before that, he was very productive. Isaiah Likely has come in and been very productive. That whole, he wants to get the ball to the best players. Did the same thing with Tampa Bay. Did the same thing in Georgia with Brock Bowers and that offense there. So he wants to rely on the best players, and he's going to look for weaknesses. And like I said, I'm going to be excited to see how he can utilize guys like Quinshon Judkins, if he's healthy, Harold Fannin, whatever wide receiver. God, I hope we bring in some sort of wide receiver that's dynamic, because boy, do we need it. So whatever wide receiver that is, and then also, if we'll have David Njoku or not, I don't know. I think Todd Monken would be able to get a ton out of David Njoku. That's assuming, David Njoku still has the physical ability to stay healthy and play well in the NFL. But David Njoku screams, like, physical weapons like that are players that Todd Monken wants to take advantage of. And I think if David can stay healthy all year, and he can be a very important piece of our offense, yet again, because he was with Kevin too. But that's the way that I think Monken would go about providing a floor for this team that we haven't seen over the past couple seasons. Just being much more creative, being much more week to week, game plan to game plan, rather than this is our scheme, this is what we're going to do. if we can't run the ball, we're not going to be able to play offense, because that's what we dealt with over the past however many seasons with Kevin. Like, since Chubb went down, our run game was just not good enough. And like in Kevin's offense, if you can't run the ball effectively, you really struggle all around. That's why it was so impressive to me to see what Joe Flacco was able to do in 23. But like, once that magic ran out, you really saw how limited that offense can be without a dynamic run game. And so hopefully, we can just have a higher floor. Like I've said, and I've said it so many times this podcast, because I really just want you guys to understand. And I think that's the main thing that Andrew Berry and Jimmy Haslam kind of were looking for. Who can make this offense not suck so bad to the point where we have no chance to win more than 5 games? I'm not going to say that Nathan Shieldhouse couldn't have done that, but I do see why they could have gotten themselves to the point where they just trust Todd Monken more than Nathan Shieldhouse to do that. So that was a long-winded introduction into the way Todd Monken goes about coaching offense. And there's more to come with that. I do want to maybe even do like a little bit of some film stuff. I'll have to work through some technical things with that to get that out to you guys. But I am interested in doing that, particularly with Todd Monken's offense, to show you kind of how that would work. But anyway, I can see why they came to that conclusion. And like I said, on the football side of things, it makes sense to me. Initially, I was distraught by the decision and just kind of, like I said, flabbergasted on Twitter by the decision. But I think the more and more time goes on, the more and more makes sense to me. That said, on the other side of the equation here, we have a kind of concerning idea. And I'm not ready to say for certain that it's, like alarm bells going off, fire in the building. But I question the process that this team went about to getting to Todd Monken. And that's not to say that it doesn't, that Todd Monken doesn't make sense for the football team. I think he does. But whenever you take into consideration the general manager that was supposed to be going about this coaching search, in Andrew Berry, in the way he relies on data analytics and being driven by like data in general, I just find it so hard to believe that that process would result with the team hiring a guy like Todd Monken, who is at this point 59 years old and has never even been a head coach in the league. I think they're going to do their best over the next month, 2 months, 3 months to prove to us that it was Andrew Berry's decision, but I'm not sure I'm ever going to buy that. That does not mean that it can't be a good hire for all the reasons that I talked about, before this segment of the show. But it does mean that the process and the power dynamic inside of the Browns organization still seems to be very much flawed. Because obviously, if Andrew Berry wasn't the one who had the final say in coming up with the head coach, we know who did. Mr. Jimmy Haslam. In my opinion, the way I view this situation is I think that more than likely Andrew Berry was a big fan of Nathan Shieldhouse, would have hired him on the spot, but Jimmy Haslam, was concerned about the lack of experience, the guy being very young, which, makes sense. But why do you have Andrew Berry? Like, why did you even keep Andrew Berry in the building if you were going to just undercut his decision regardless and kind of come up with your own conclusion. I do think, though, Todd Monken probably was on, a finalist in Andrew Berry's search, because I don't think that Haslam just made this decision purely on his own. I'm sure Andrew Berry, to a certain extent, was interested in Todd Monken because, he provides an offensive ability. But like I said, there's just no way in my mind that I could ever be convinced that Andrew Berry, Andrew Berry and his process came to the conclusion that Todd Monken was going to be the head coach. I just don't believe it. So I think you guys get the gist of where I'm going there. Like, there's just some questions that I think we all maybe haven't had to think about with the stability that we've had in Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry over the past 6 years regarding the owner of the football team and kind of the negative impact that those questions result in. And I think it's very rare I'm a guy who believes in professional sports process is such an important thing. And it's very hard for bad processes to result in good things. It's not, like I said, and I've already touched on it, that's not to say that Monken can't turn out to be a very good coach for this team. I think he has the ability to do that. I'll be blunt with you guys. I think he can do that. I think this team can win games next year because I think he will provide a floor for the offense, and I think the defense will continue to be good. But I just really question the long-term stability of this decision based on the lack of effective process that I believe went on behind the scenes. And I think we're going to find out more. I think that's why I'm very interested to see the initial press conference and kind of hear the questions to see if, Andrew Berry's so good at talking in public, so I'm sure he's going to be very buttoned up and provide pretty much no insight into what actually happened. But I'm just interested to see if we get any sort of droplets of information in the future about what kind of went on behind the scenes during this coaching search. But yeah, that's what I mean by this thing is kind of two-sided. Hopefully that makes sense to you guys. That was my biggest takeaway from this decision to hire Todd Monken. And it'll be interesting to see what side of that kind of equation proves to be the more important one. The football side or the flawed ownership behind the scenes process side. With the Browns, it almost always tends to be the part about the owner. The negative part about the owner seems to take quite the ownership in the outcome. But we will see. I have been very open on this podcast that I'm going to give the next head coach a clean sheet, a chance to prove to all of us that he can be a good head coach at the NFL level. And with Todd Monken, I'm absolutely going to do that. I do want to talk a little bit now, and before I do this, I'm going to continue to, like I said, go deeper into what Todd Monken can provide for this team. Once we hear, more about the coaching staff, once we hear more about his interests in the quarterback position and all of these aspects that now are going to kind of start to snowball on each other, we'll have much more to talk about with that. But I do want to talk about Jim Schwartz to end today's show, because I thought my initial reaction to Jim Schwartz essentially backing out of the defensive coordinator position. Well, first off, I was surprised. I thought that more than likely the reason the team hired Todd Monken was because there was some sort of agreement that Jim Schwartz was going to continue to be the defensive coordinator. And I think that was a common belief yesterday before we heard that the opposite was true. But once we did hear the opposite was true, I actually have a pretty positive opinion about that. And what I mean by that is I think it takes the possibility that the process of hiring the head coach, it takes the possibility of that process being so bad that the defensive coordinator essentially had a say in who the head coach was, the next head coach. Like, that would be so backward to me that I would have like fundamentally lost hope in this team's ability to make a proper decision going forward. And so hearing that Jim Schwartz was upset by this decision honestly made me a little bit more excited about the Todd Monken hire, because it means to me that it's further proof to me that Andrew Berry and Jimmy Haslam were actually just fans of Todd Monken and what he can provide for this team. I don't think it really had much to do with Jim Schwartz. I think Jim Schwartz, the part that had something to do with Jim Schwartz was that they were valuing him as a potential head coach. Like, I think they let him leverage his defensive player, like the voice of the defensive players, and Myles Garrett, Denzel Ward, all these guys. They let him leverage that in a way that I think impacted their head coaching search, because they were simply floating out these ideas that they wanted to keep Jim Schwartz as defensive coordinator. Like, that was leaked way too much for there to not be any truth to that statement. And I think that obviously had an impact on the coaching search. I'd be interested to hear, is that why Yadinsky stepped away? Is that why Mike McDaniel stepped away? Because, like, maybe the Browns would have ended up going with one of those guys had they known that Schwartz was going to end up throwing the tantrum that he did anyway and storming out of the building and saying all of his goodbyes. Maybe they would have come to a different, candidate if they would have known that Schwartz was going to leave anyway. Interesting to think about. But ultimately, like I said, yeah, like I just think that it provides me with a little bit more comfortability in the decision-making process that the Browns went about in this search. On the other hand, though, I've heard way too much today, in that the Browns could potentially re-salvage the relationship with Jim Schwartz and keep him as the defensive coordinator. Look, guys, Jim Schwartz is a good coordinator. I think he's probably a top 5 defensive coordinator. At times, I think he's outside the top 5. But for the most part, and in the aggregate, I think he's a top 5 defensive coordinator. He's good. But my God, we have to let this guy walk out of the building. The worst thing you can do for a head coach like Todd Monken, who he has an understanding of football, he has an understanding of how the NFL works. He's almost 60. The worst thing you can do is put another what is Jim? Jim's like 63 years old. Throw another 63-year-old guy who it appears is power hungry in the Browns organization and already has the backing of all of the players on defense. Throw him into the mix when he's clearly expressed that he's not happy about the decision. I get it, money talks, and you can probably keep him by paying him more. But if there's anything that can instantaneously make this Todd Monken hire go to shit in the matter of days, it would be that right there. I can literally almost guarantee you there will be There will be drama throughout the whole entire season between Jim Schwartz, that defense. It'll almost feel like the defense versus the offense in that case. I'm not interested in that. I want absolutely no part of that. I would rather the defense play a little bit worse with a, young or whatever new defensive coordinator, because I think like Jim Schwartz elevated Myles Garrett to the next level. Myles Garrett is now at the next level. Like, he's the best player in the league almost. Damn near the best player in the league. So whoever comes in is not going to have a hard job. Just make sure Myles Garrett gets put in position to wreak havoc, and he's going to do that. It's just the player he is. There's other talent all over the defense. I'm not worried about bringing in a defensive coordinator. I think even promoting from within could be a viable solution too. But please, Browns, just let Jim Schwartz walk out of the building. The bridge has been burned at this point. You can't show that you fully anticipated being the head coach, throw a fit after that, and then come back and expect the head coach to be willing to trust you with half of the team. That's not going to work. It doesn't work like that. They absolutely need to let Jim Schwartz leave, and I hope they do so. We will find out soon, I am sure. Today was a long one, a lot to talk about, and I could talk for, honestly, probably another 30 minutes about this decision, and we will get into everything else that there is to talk about. Shedeur Sanders, what this means for the draft, what this means for Myles Garrett with his, meme that he put on social media, and I don't even really want to get into that, but we probably will in the next podcast. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, that is all I wanted to talk about today. Let me know what you guys think about Todd Monken. Let me know, is it starting to grow on you a little bit more like it is with me? Hopefully I was able to convince some of you to just let things work themselves out a little bit here. And we'll see how we can build this thing back up to being a competitive football team, and it's going to start with the offense. So I'll be right here with you guys throughout the whole entire off season. If you guys are enjoying the podcast, please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. There's a lot of you guys, I say this all the time, there's a lot of you guys watching that are not subscribed, so please hit the subscribe button. It means the world to me, keeps me motivated to do this for you all. But otherwise, I will see you all very, very soon. Have a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.